Hello everyone, it's Karen at the Cool Tools Studio. I'm here today to demonstrate a torch fireable ring project using Phoenix clay. So before creating this video, I wanted to do my homework. I created and torch fired a ring using our Phoenix Torch Fireable Clay when it was in its testing phase, and has since been wearing this ring almost every day for 14 months. It held up, showing some wear and tear, as would be expected as a fine silver ring, but it's not broken and I think it still looks great. This leads me to feel comfortable recommending Phoenix Torch Fireable Clay for a ring project for people who would like to create rings out of metal clay but don't own a kiln. Today's project is going to be even thicker, have more points of connection and strength than even the ring that I've been testing out, so I have no doubt that it will hold up just as well. If you need to add any of these tools or materials to your collection, there's a link to purchase in the description below. Here's what you need for the clay working portion of today's project. I have some ring and bangle texture tiles, and these are just a lot of fun because they have linear patterns that are perfect for something like a ring band. I have some cool slip, some silicone ring mandrels, and a wonder roller. I have a work surface, a tissue blade, a clay shaper, a brush, and precision hole punches that I'm going to use to set a 5mm round stone. I have a snake maker, some tough cards, sanding pads, a dish for water, and clay thickness rolling frames. I'm going to be using Phoenix Torch Fireable Clay in both the lump and paste form. I'm going to make my ring band a little bit thicker than I usually do since I'm working with fine silver, and I'm going to be rolling my clay to 6 cards thickness and then texturing down to 5 cards. So just like always, I'm prepping my work surface and my roller with some cool slip, and then I'm starting off with the 6. And when you're rolling clay and you're shooting for a longer shaped strip of clay, it's best to start off with a coil. And I'm just rolling that to 6 cards. And then we're going to texture down to 5 for the final thickness of my band. And Cool Tools has lots of different textures and patterns that are this style with the linear patterns, but I really liked this one, so I'm using this today, but I need an additional tile to prop up my clay thickness rolling frame. Some more cool slip to keep things from sticking. And I'm going to lay my sheet of clay over top my desired pattern there. And I'm just going to push down and apply pressure and do one even roll forward. And that's just going to keep me from potentially doing something called ghosting, where if you roll back and forth, your clay can shift and your pattern will look kind of skewed. So I've got my texture there. And now I'm going to use a tough card to cut on, so I'm not cutting up my nice work surface here. And since I'm cutting a perfect straight line, instead of using a clay pick and trying to line that up, I'm just going to use a tissue blade. This texture is one of the more fine of the ring and bangle texture tiles, but it does end up, I really like the kind of subtle pattern it has when it's finished. But it's kind of hard to see in the greenware, so I'm going to come down a little bit to the level of my clay here so I can line up my tissue blade. I've got the cut side down, and I'm just applying some pressure on my blade there. And then I'm going to repeat to the other side. I'm going to take this clay off to the side and save it for another project. So at this point, I'm ready to wrap it around my silicone ring mandrel. And you can anticipate this project to shrink about 2.5 sizes. So I'm going to start off on a size 9 here. Something I like to do to help my clay kind of stick to my mandrel is just dampen it. And that's going to help my clay stay in place as I'm kind of manipulating things. And I'm going to wrap it around. And then again use my tissue blade to cut off the excess. And at this point, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Phoenix is a very stiff clay when it's in its greenware phase, so it's hard to do big alterations like it would be to cut out a section to place your stone so there's light behind it. So I'm going to trim up my ends so they meet with the tissue blade. And then I'm going to use a precision hole punch to kind of pre-cut a place where my stone can go. So just so you can see what I'm talking about, I've got a stone already set here. And if I were to try to allow this to dry and then cut out an area so that the stone can get light behind it, it would be hard to make that edit in the greenware phase. So I'm just going to go ahead and at this point come in with a precision hole punch that is a size or two smaller than your overall setting. So I'm going to be using the magenta to make my setting, and I'm using my pink today to alter the ring band. So I'm just going to try to get these two ends to sort of stay put, and then I'm going to kind of pre-cut and sort of establish that form at this point. I am going to have to knock down the extra on the ends here a little bit, but I will be able to do that by the time it kind of shrinks as it dries some. So I'm going to take this off to dry. As a note, when I'm drying Phoenix, I prefer to use a hot plate. Using a dehydrator does work, but it just takes quite a bit longer because Phoenix is such a dense clay, whereas with the hot plate, it heats the metal and then the metal conducts the heat, and it really does a good job of thoroughly drying your pieces. So I recommend a hot plate when you're drying your Phoenix if possible. So while the ring band is drying, I'm going to set my stone, and for that I'm going to use the method where you use thickness rolling frames to determine how thick your setting needs to be, and then cut the setting itself using precision hole punches. So I just kind of start off with a stack of thickness rolling frames here, and you're going to take your acrylic snake maker and roll it around on top of the stack. And what you're looking for is you don't want the stone to move, but you also don't want the setting to be so thick. So I kind of go down until it starts moving. Like here, that would be too thin of a setting and your stone would be poking out the back. So at this point, I'll go ahead and add rolling frames until it no longer moves. So we're still moving a little bit. I'm going to go up to the 3, and that will be a deep enough setting for the stone. So now that I've determined the depth of my setting, I'm just going to take a snake maker, take some clay, and squish. So I'm going to start off by cutting the interior. Before I do so, I'm going to take some cool slip and dip my precision hole punch, and then I'm cutting out the inside of my setting, and then I'm going to step my stone, come back with my acrylic snake maker, and apply some downward pressure to set that stone. So then at this point, I'm taking my larger precision hole punch, also dipping it in cool slip, and then I kind of eyeball and very gently push down to see if it's looking centered. And that looks pretty good. You can do some adjusting with sanding. And then at that point, I'm going to push all the way down. So I could take this and blow on the back to try to get it out, but what I usually just do is I'll take this straight to the hot plate, set it down like this, and allow it to dry and shrink out. And then it'll just pop right out. While my setting is drying, I'm going to make some little accent elements to go on the side of my setting. And for today, I'm just going to be making some simple balls. You could use any shape you like, or you could use our finishing touches to create a shape, but I'm just doing something very beginner friendly today. And I just pinched off a little bit of clay, and I'm just going to be rolling it in the palm of my hand with my index finger until it's nice and round. And I'm just going to repeat that in a couple of sizes. I wanted to have a bigger one in the middle and then 2 smaller on either side. And then I will also allow these to dry, and then we'll start assembling things. Before we get to assembling, we're going to do a little bit of refinement, and my setting turned out pretty well from just falling out of the punch, but I always like to take a moment to do some ultrafine and microfine just on the top face. That's going to be really visible. That way when we're fired, it'll polish up to a nice shine. And it's just easier, I find, to refine pieces like this before they're all assembled, because it's easier to kind of get down on the side than it would be if it was up against a ring band. But if you're doing any shaping and removing of material, you'd want to do that before you size your band to fit it. So I'm happy with the size and shape and everything of this setting, so now I'm going to adjust my ring band so it's a nice fit. So by using the precision hole punch to kind of pre-cut this shape to match there, I don't have too much work to do, but I'm just going to slide it off. And I've got a fine sanding pad here, and I'm going to support by holding my ring on either side here. And I'm just going to very gently remove a little bit of material here until things are fitting nicely. So this is kind of one of those, do a little bit of sanding and then kind of try things on for size. And if you did have like a needle file or something else that's narrower sitting around, you could certainly use that as well. I'm just trying to do this project today kind of beginner friendly with less tools. And you could also cut this pad to kind of remove some more material if your gap isn't this big, if you're doing like a smaller stone. So now I'm going to slip back onto my mandrel to check size. I think I'll probably have to do a little bit more removing. So you can see how it's fitting nicely on that round, but there's still a little bit too much on the ends there. So I'm just going to keep sanding until I can pop this in and it sits nicely. So at this point, I'm going to check it one more time. And you want it to be a nice tight fit, because the more points of connection, the stronger the connection is going to be. And usually to kind of check my fit, I'll actually kind of slide it off the ring mandrel and make sure we're staying where we should be and that everything's fitting nicely. So at this point, I'm going to pull it out and then come in with some paste. You could use lumped clay for this if you don't want to buy paste, but the paste is just a really nice consistency. It's really easy to work with. It's very convenient, and I enjoy using it for the connections. I'm going to kind of manipulate it so it's just on the end of my tool here, and I'm just applying it to both ends. And you don't have to worry about overfilling, because you are going to be adding those dot elements. So if this squishes out up and over and into your texture, that's fine. We're going to be adding those little dots, and no one will know. So now I'm coming in with my stone and pushing down, and at this point I'm going to take a damp brush to smooth things out. And again, I'm going to be adding some dots there, so I'm not worried about there being kind of a low area here, because I'll add more material when I'm adding those dots anyways. So I always like to dry in between steps, so I could try to kind of add my dots now, but you might end up kind of bumping and jostling your stone and that connection there, and that would sort of weaken it. So for the strength and for keeping things running smoothly, I always like to dry between steps. So I'm going to allow this to dry completely and then add my little dots. So that connection has dried, so now I'm going to come in with a little more paste to add the ball elements. And just because my ring is still kind of warm, I'm going to add a little bit of moisture to my clay before I add my paste for this connection, because I just came right off the heat. And I'm scooping up a little bit again with my clay shaper. I'm just going to try to lay it down and then scoot it with my brush. There's a little bit of a gap here between my band and my setting. I'm going to kind of scoot off to get this side. And the brush is kind of too soft to pick up the paste. That's why I'm kind of alternating between clay shaper. I use a shaper to pick up the paste and then the brush to kind of smooth things out some. I'm gonna add some more material over here and then we'll be ready to start placing. And then for picking up and placing these balls, I usually just take my damp brush and I'll just kind of tap them and then I'll place and use the brush to kind of scoot in position. I'm doing 3 on either side. Get this last ball on there. So then at this point, I'm going to make my brush very damp and then just go over all of the seams. And the point of these balls is kind of twofold. They're a nice little accent and element, and they kind of help hide the connecting seam from the band to the stone here, but they're also building up another point of contact and another point of connection. So it's no longer just, oh, the ring band is connected to the setting, the ring band is connected to the setting, connected to the ball, connected to the setting, and all of that is just going to lend more strength to your pieces. So I'm going to thoroughly wet and combine these pieces and then allow it to dry one more time before adding some more paste and checking out the inside of my ring. So now I'm taking a look at the inside of my ring here, and before I start adding material, I'll usually do some sanding to just get a better sense of what area is higher, what area is lower, and where the material needs to be added. When it's rough like that, it's kind of hard to make the best choices for what you need to do. But by just really quickly kind of cleaning it up, you can get a clearer sense of if there's a gap anywhere, or if there's a spot that needs anything added. So kind of tap to get rid of the dust. And there is a little bit of a high area and then a low spot and then a high area here between my band and my setting that I'm going to fill. And for that, I'm just going to, again, scoop up a little bit of paste. And then I'm using a clay shaper to place it. And then smoothing out with my damp brush. I'm just kind of blending on either side of it to smooth that transition. I'm going to flip and do the same to the other side. Because I'm just making small little additions here, I'm using paste. If you had a very big hole or if you were doing a larger addition of material, I would recommend taking your lump clay itself and kind of just folding a little bit of water into it with your clay shaper. But if it's just a minor kind of low area, you will be fine to just use paste to fill that in. So earlier I had scooted off and addressed one side where there was kind of a gap, but at this point I'm going to again kind of look at and see if I need to add any material between my band and my setting now that it's off the mandrel. And then when I'm happy with everything, I'm going to allow it to dry completely and then do some final refinement. So now I'm ready to finish things off by doing some refinement. Since I used a tissue blade to cut my edges here, I'm not going to do too much work on them, but I always do like to come in with a superfine sanding pad on an edge like this on the inside there, if it's a broad kind of band, and just round out that corner just a bit to make it a little bit more of a comfort fit sort of style. It is just less likely to pinch, and it'll be a little bit more comfortable for the wearer if you just spend a little bit of time on that edge. And then while I'm at it, I'm also going to do some back and forth sanding over here behind my stone and kind of clean up where I was adding that paste. Then I'm going to come up to the top here and just kind of any areas really where you feel like you need to do some removal of material. I'll be very gentle with the superfine, and then I'll use the ultrafine and microfine to sand out the scratches that were created by using the superfine. So now I'm moving down to ultrafine because I don't really need to do any shaping. I'm just doing some cleanup of surfaces. I'm going to go over my added elements here. I always kind of sand these, not like intentionally super rough, but I'm making sure I'm applying some pressure and drag here because I want to make sure they're securely attached. If they're going to fall off, I would rather they fall off now in the greenware phase than after I have fired them. So make sure you're giving them a good brush by to make sure they're attached. And then once I've worked my way through with the ultrafine, I'll move down to microfine and we'll be ready to fire. So I've done all my refinement, and just as a final step before I fire, I'm going to use some alcohol on a little disposable applicator brush here to clean my stone. And that's just going to make sure that I remove any grease or dust or anything that could cloud the quality of my stone here. And as another note, while we're talking about stones, this is a 5mm round. You would not want to fire anything larger than that with a torch, because the thermal shock from the heating and cooling on a stone larger than that would cause it to crack. For the firing portion of this project, you need a safe environment to fire in, so something like an annealing pan filled with pumice is perfect. You also need a firing brick to fire on, and then safety glasses, a respirator, a fume extractor, and then your torch. When you're torch firing, you always want to make sure you're firing in a very well ventilated environment and protecting yourself from fumes. Make sure you have tight-fitting sleeves, and if you don't, that they're pulled back. Pull back any long hair, and just check your work area for any flammable objects. When you torch fire clay, you use the color that the metal glows as an indication that you've achieved your target temperature. So I'm going to be heating this piece until it's glowing a peachy color. I'm going to then start my timer and maintain that color for 5 minutes. I'm firing in a lower light environment. That way it'll be a little bit easier to see the color that my metal is glowing. It's kind of hard to see the color when you're firing in a very bright environment. So I'm coming in with my torch, and I usually keep the inner bloom cone there, which is going to be the hottest point of my flame, about 2 inches away from my piece. It is expected, and you should anticipate, a little bit of a flame, and that's just your binders burning off. When you're torch firing, you want to keep your flame moving so you're heating the piece evenly, and that's also going to lower your risk of overheating and potentially melting any part of your clay. So once you've achieved this kind of peachy glow to your metal, it's sort of hard to see in this light, but I think we're there. I'm going to start the timing of my piece. So now my goal is just to keep my ring glowing that color for 5 minutes. All right, I have hit my 5 minutes, and at this point I'm going to take my heat away. And because this piece has a stone in it, I cannot quench it. That would break the stone. So I'm just going to allow it to air cool. Once your ring is cool enough to handle, you're ready to finish. And you have several options available to you for that. You could use a sanding block. You could use the sanding sponges that you were working with earlier. Or these flash shiners are also a really great option. For a finish like this, I would use black max to kind of darken the low areas, or you could use a patina gel, liver of sulfur. And then you want to bring up the high areas, so you could use either the ultrafine or microfine sanding pad to do that. And I like that this one's kind of a little bit of a softer finish, and it's a little bit easier to kind of see the very fine detail on that textured band. Another option is kind of bringing it up to a high shine. And for that, these flash shiners are actually really excellent. If you put the time in on your pieces before you fire them, you just start off with the green, and I'll show you on this band. And you can see it's already kind of a soft shine, and then you can flip it over and use the white to bring it up to a high shine. And again, it's totally up to you. You could darken the low areas using a patina gel or black max for more contrast, but it's also kind of nice, just the high shine with the soft white in the low spots. And of course, if you don't want to finish by hand, a rotary tumbler is always an excellent option for finishing your pieces as well. You can just pop them in the tumbler and let it do the work for you. I hope you've enjoyed this ring project using Phoenix Torch Fireable Clay, and that you feel like you can give creating rings a try. Thanks for watching.